Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. This is a fully independent podcast. Lend your support, rockfin.com/aroundtheempire, patreon.com/aroundtheempire, or paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. Scott Horton is here today, and we talk about the war in Afghanistan, a landlocked country with tough terrain, and the diverse groups of people who live there. We talk about the reasons why we lost that war and have to withdraw. We also talk about the news and the footage from that withdrawal and the progress and reactions of the various factions who support and oppose it, and the dishonesty and hypocrisy that happen when people try to justify long wars and occupations like this one. In a bonus episode, we discuss the possibility for destabilization of the entire region around Afghanistan, Central Asia, the impact and involvement of China, Russia, and Iran, and how things are likely to play out. Scott Horton is author of the book Fool's Errand: Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and his most recent book, Enough Already: Time to End the War on Terrorism. He's the managing director of the Libertarian Institute, the editorial director of antiwar.com, host of Anti-War Radio on KPFK, and the host of the Scott Horton Show podcast. He has spent the last 2 decades giving voice to ardent anti-war and anti-interventionist activists, experts, reporters, veterans from across the spectrum, and he's done more than 5,000 interviews. We recorded this on July 15th, 2021. Scott Horton's with us today, joins the show, comes back to the show, but it's been a while. It's great to see you, Scott. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you, Joanne?
Good. So I wanted to talk about Afghanistan.
Yeah.
It's like what everybody's talking about, right? Or actually all of one set of people. I guess most of the country just, they probably see the headlines, but don't follow that news very often. But so, I mean, let's just start out, if you would, like, maybe it's best to start out with a little bit of the regional stuff. Maybe just lay out the different regions of Afghanistan and who was in control of them and who's in control of them now. Just sort of how the nation's divided up, just for an overview, and then let's talk about the withdrawal and all the things that have been happening lately.
Sure. So, I mean, the way to understand why America lost the war is in explaining what you're talking about here, just who's who and what have you like that. Yeah. So, the very brass tacks, Afghanistan is the size of Texas, and it's landlocked north of Pakistan, which is shaped like sort of backwards L type of a shape there, and separates Afghanistan from the Indian Ocean. And not only that, there's a giant mountain range there that goes up and down the border region of Afghanistan and Pakistan. And so it's not just landlocked away from the ocean, but also behind a giant mountain range. And so, and then also it's got deserts like California and mountains like Colorado, and is, really tough territory, and is, mostly countryside, right? There are some, a few big cities, but there's a lot of kind of wilderness out there and countryside out there. And it's essentially untamable land. And in fact, when people say that historically, no empire can control Afghanistan, it's not really right. It's just they can't control the countryside. They can control the major cities, an all-powerful, military force can occupy Kandahar city or Kabul for, even 20 years. But they can't pacify the whole country any more than if they're trying to pacify Texas and take it away from the Texans who live here. And so then also you have a real problem of ethnicity and tribe and, divisions along those lines. So in the far east of the country and in the south, and in some places in the north too, up near Kunduz, this is the predominantly Pashtun part of the country. Now, the Pashtun tribes are not the majority, but they are the plurality. And the rest of the tribes that, then there are some smaller ones, but the major dominant tribes in the north are the Tajiks, the Uzbeks, and the Hazaras. The Hazaras are Shiites, which, as well as being a different ethnicity, are also a different religious sect. And then, the Tajiks and the Hazaras are, a different ethnicity from further north in Asia than the Pashtun tribes. And so, and it's not just that they're different ethnicities, because what the hell does that amount to? It may or may not amount to anything. But in this case, it amounts to everything. It really is, like separate nations. So it's not just the difference between, say, whites and blacks and Mexicans in your same town, where in my town, everybody's an Austinite. That's our race. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But a lot of that stuff is a lot of those divisions are kind of, much less important. But here, when you have an army that's made up of Tajiks from the north of the country, and you're trying to build up this army of Tajiks to then lord it over the Pashtuns in the south of the country, you're essentially, acting as a proxy, using one nation, quote unquote, to occupy another nation. The fact that it's within the borders of this, so-called state of Afghanistan is, sort of becomes beside the point. You might as well be talking about different nations of people. In fact, the British drew those borders, at least the eastern border was drawn for the purpose of dividing those Pashtun tribes. Maybe we would have Pashtunistan or something like that, if the borders had been evolved in a more natural way. Maybe they wouldn't really all be Afghans and countrymen together at all. But certainly in the attempt to foist a Tajik and Uzbek army into power over these Pashtuns, well, they just don't have the will to do it. You can't tell an Uzbek that you're fighting for freedom, you're fighting for your country, defending your country from this Taliban invasion, when you're the invader and you're not from the Helmand province, and you're the one who's down there, lording it over these people. And the Taliban, meanwhile, are not foreign invaders. They're from the Helmand province. That's their territory. And so they, the Northern Army essentially had no spirit in the fight. They're just getting paid as a mercenary army backed by the United States. And, if we were backing them the whole time under the auspices of keeping the Pashtuns out or something, when maybe they would go along with that. But they never had any spirit in trying to, dominate the southern regions of the country. That's just not where they were from. They don't even speak the same language at all. In the south, in the north, they speak Urdu and I don't know, whatever other languages, I guess Farsi and other languages, and then the Pashtuns speak Pashto. So it really is, if it was in North America in the early 1400s, we would call these nations. They're not exactly nation states, right? But like Indian nations, where these are separate peoples within this state. And so what America's tried to do is foist a minority coalition onto the plurality population. And it didn't work. And, it's not just that, is that this is a warrior culture. And this is not, a Western, and frankly, the Westerners are the worst warmongers of all. But I just mean the Westerners at least claim to have, higher goals in civilization than just being the toughest guy. We praise technocrats and expertise and studiousness and whatever. These guys pick the strongest man to be the leader. And then, simple as that. I guess we have that, only our strength is measured in dollars, rather than just who can build up the strongest armed militia. But, this is a culture where, and frankly, just like, I don't know what state you're from, but just like certainly Texans would be, if anyone some foreign nation tried to establish a beachhead on our territory, or bribe and buy off our governor and our attorney general and our politicians, and build bases and patrol our people and treat Texans the way that we have tried to do to the people of Afghanistan, us Texans, we would shoot them all until they were all dead or had given up and withdrawn. As simple as that. And the Taliban have been the same way. And I'll finally shut up after I say one last thing. The Taliban's their rules or their qualifications for sitting down to negotiate with the Americans has always been one thing: you're leaving, and we will not accept you staying. Period. That's it. Now, if you want to negotiate how you exit, we will negotiate how you will exit. Right. But once it's agreed that that's what we're negotiating, that you are pulling your combat forces out of our country, period. And they've never given in on that, not an inch, and they're not going to. And so then that's it. And then for the last, because Bush, not just, he, first of all, he didn't go after Al Qaeda. He went after the Taliban instead. He overthrew their government, and then he installed a new government. And then he declared war against all of its enemies, and meaning the Taliban, who from about 2005, 2006, decided that they're coming back. And with the help of the Pakistanis, they've been able to do that. And the Americans have been completely unable to stop them. And in fact, if we look at the giant escalation of the surge in 2009 through 12, that just made matters worse. That just drove more people into the insurgency. So you can't even say that that was staving it off. That was actually just accelerating America's defeat by making more and more people part of the fight on the other side, by bringing the fight to them, whereas before it had passed them by. And so they simply, they painted themselves into a corner that they can't get out of, other than just essentially admitting defeat and leaving. And they asked Biden, has the mission failed? He said, not yet. Meaning,
did he say that?
Yeah, he did. He said the mission has not failed yet. Meaning that he accepts that
Expects it will. Okay.
Yeah, like his the way he framed it, he goes, look, we didn't fail because our mission was to build up an army that ought to be able to hold on to power. And you know what? We did. They got a 300,000 man army. And if they can't hold it together with a 300,000 man army, maybe that's their failure, not ours. Which, whatever. I don't care what you call it, Biden. Just get the soldiers out of there. Yeah. And so that's the way he's trying to split the difference and save face, is blame it all on the Tajiks. Okay. But we could have told you all along that you can't foist a Tajik army on a plurality Pashtun population, that they're just not going to stand for it. And everyone who said that this whole time, and I could list you plenty, were right.
Right. Yeah, I listened to your interview with Danny Sherson that I think was just published today or yesterday, which was good. And he's, concerned that we're going to get pulled back in. And, on Twitter, we were talking last night, you said you had heard some things about how we might get pulled back in. I just saw some interview with a former, the last one, not the current MI6 guy, but the one that was the head of the MI6 until September, I think. Mm-hmm. And he's saying some similar things to, and then George Bush comes up on Deutsche Welle on a German. That's bizarre in itself, but he's in there lamenting, what a disaster this is going to be. And of course, the women, always the women, which that's another subject. That really upsets me that people use women as an excuse for this kind of thing.
Yeah, the Republican Party have always been the vanguard of the feminist movement in America, Joanne. You don't know that? Yeah, George Bush cares so much about that. And what's hilarious, right, is no one can say to him that, listen, scumbag, if you had won the war, or say if you had, sketched out attainable goals in the first place and then attained them, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. How can anyone claim that as long as you just continue to lose indefinitely, then you haven't lost yet? That's just crazy. America lost the war 10 years ago. Just because they haven't closed down the last of the bases until now doesn't mean anything. The war was, they Petraeus promised, we'll have this thing beat. We'll have the Taliban on their knees at our table with a bloody nose, signing whatever we tell them to sign by July 2011, 10 years ago. And that didn't happen. It didn't happen. David Petraeus failed. Simple as that. Way back then.
Or he just flat out lied, because you had McCain, saying around that same time, I think it was around the 2008 election. Didn't he say we're going to stay in Afghanistan for 50 or 100 years or something like that?
Well, I think that was Iraq. I think the question was,
Uh,
would you stay? And he said, yeah, why not 100?
yeah. I
When
mean,
they all made this comparison to Korea and Japan. They're like, which of course is
generational.
just, they're just completely thoughtless the way they bring up Korea and Japan. They don't talk about it with any context at all. They just go, well, look, we still got troops in Korea and Japan. Well, yeah, but we haven't been fighting an insurgency against the Koreans and the Japanese at all this whole time because, frankly, we were welcome guests to help keep the Soviets out, by the Japanese and by their former puppets in South Korea. And so, they needed us at least for a while, during the days of the Cold War and all of that. But this isn't that at all. This is an
Yeah.
entirely different thing. Same with Iraq, too. We're not welcome there, even by the people. In Iraq, the war was to put the majority in power. So they've been able to hang on to power, right? The government that Bush installed in Baghdad is still the government of the country because they were the super majority. Now, the problem was they didn't like us and they didn't need us. And as soon as we finished helping them win the war, they told George Bush, thanks a lot for the help. Now, don't let the door hit you in the ass on the way out, and kicked us right back out again because they had everything they needed, including the power. America had helped them finish cleansing the capital city of Baghdad of all their Sunni Arab enemies, and they had their alliance with the Iranians next door. So they were set. And now I guess Bush can look at that and say, yeah, see, that's all you got to do is do your surge right or whatever. That's because he still doesn't know the difference between the different pieces on the board at all. Whereas in Afghanistan, this always was, sorry to coin a phrase, a fool's errand. This was never going to work unless you just dropped H-bombs on the Pashtuns and killed them and then called that peace. You cannot take over southern and eastern Afghanistan. You just can't unless you're from there,
Yeah. And for, more background on this kind of stuff and why we didn't even have to do this to begin with, why there were other options like early on. I'm pretty sure most people watching this know you more than they know me. But if they don't, here it is. Read this book and his
it's in
many
there.
interviews on it.
Yeah. It's funny. I noticed when this is in the news and all the experts are talking about it, there's no overlap. Right. And part of that is my fault because I should have made a career out of writing articles about Afghanistan for as many venues as I possibly could this whole time. But I'm not really an Afghanistan expert any more than any of the rest of the wars. It's just I got bogged down writing chapter 2 and it turned into a whole book. But so once the book was done, I didn't want to just continue focusing on Afghanistan at the expense of everything else. Right. But so you have all these people. I see them on Twitter and I see them writing for the different websites and whatever about Afghanistan. And they've never heard of me or my arguments or my book. And vice versa in a lot of cases too. Right. Where there's just, the Afghanistan expert discussion that's going on. I'm not part of it. And which is in a way is also by design too, where like, I'm not really writing for a Washington, D.C. audience. I'm really writing for you and your people to read. It's for, I'm a populist, not an elitist. And so I kind of just wrote for, why you don't have to believe in this crap anymore, rather than why you powerful people ought to be listening to me and do what I say. Cause I'm not under any illusions that that's going to work anyway,
Well, wait a minute though. I mean, that poll, the last poll we saw from military veterans and maybe active duty in that.
Yeah.
And then there was another one just among the populace. That's your audience because it was like more than 70% of people who said this war was not even worth it. Right?
Although, again, I don't think that's because they listen to me or to Matthew Ho as much as just the calendar. You look at the calendar and you go, how come we still be at war against this tiny little group of guys? We finished off the Nazis and the Imperial Japanese in 4 years, but it takes us 20 years to kill 400 guys. And now the 400 is 40,000 and spread from Nigeria to the Philippines with no end in sight. That can't be right. You know what I mean? You could be anybody. You could be the most right-wing George Bush lover, not even realize this whole time since till 2021, do you even bother to second guess it at all? But then stop and go, wait a minute. It is pretty late in the game to still be fighting this same, set of battles. And
So this,
I saw a thing at conservative headquarters, conservative HQ, Richard Vigory's group. And the headline was Biden surrenders to radical Islam. I was like, we're right back in 2004 or 5 or something with this crap.
yeah,
And how everybody knows, no evidence cited whatsoever, just stated in one, plain, bland, declarative statement that, well, the Taliban want world revolution and to overthrow and enslave all of humanity under Sharia law. And like you couldn't headbutt this author hard enough to get him to understand that that's not true. The Taliban want to rule Afghanistan, which is 1/300th of the world, or 1/3000th of it. You know what I mean? Give me a break. What are we talking about here? How the hell are the Taliban going to take over anything? It's like when they remade Red Dawn and North Korea somehow dominates all of Asia and then crosses the Pacific and comes for us too. Yeah, I'm sure the North Koreans and the Taliban are going to work together to enslave all of mankind. And because they learn what magic, or all of a sudden they're part of a Bugs Bunny cartoon where they can just reach off screen and grab whatever they need, H bombs, long range bombers, hundreds of thousands of trained infantry, whatever it is. It's completely ridiculous. But if you're, there's a certain segment of people who like to believe in that. Or at least they like being told that as late as halfway through 2021, just so they could tell themselves that they haven't been wrong all along.
Right.
And if the whole thing is a loss and a disgrace, it's because of what a weakling Joe Biden is, not because of what an idiot they are for believing in this crap all this time.
Yeah. I just heard somebody say cut and run recently too. I hadn't heard that in a while.
I know.
It's like, yeah,
I'm for it.
Cut and run,
cut
exactly.
And run. You lost the war. What's hard to believe about that? Did you think that you won it? Or like, don't change horses in midstream. Yeah, but this war started 4 presidents ago. And we have term limits on the presidency in the United States. We have to change horses in midstream. Now we're on our 5th horse. What the hell are we doing? Does this make any sense at all? How wide is this stream anyway? You don't cross the Mississippi River on a horse, man. A whole thing, all the metaphors break down, and who would have thought that? Oh yeah, no, if you believe in and follow what Frank Gaffney says, at the end of the day, it doesn't pan out. It doesn't work out. It never was right.
No. And Bush coming out and saying that, I mean, I don't know, maybe I should have expected that, but
well, a couple months ago, Biden called him and said, listen, I'm going to end this thing. And I want your blessing on that. Basically, be easier for me if you don't trash me on it. And Bush agreed. Pardon me. Bush agreed to that. Bush, I think, put out a statement saying that, I support, or agreed to let Biden put out a statement saying, I talked to Bush today and I talked to Obama too. And they both say that, yes, it's time to go ahead and call it quits. And now here's Bush betraying him just 6 weeks, 8 weeks later.
And he had to go to the German media to do that.
Yeah. And he's got nothing to say. What's he got to say?
I did not. I'm not sure if I heard the whole interview, but I didn't hear him having any alternatives, ideas.
Did they ask him, hey, how many more German boys are supposed to die for this thing? How many more American boys are supposed to die for this thing? And at what point do you think, how many Pashtun men do you think you got to kill before they abandon their beliefs and no longer are who they are anymore, but become your 21st century digital boy instead, and implement your Brown University wokeism in the Helmand province? I mean, the reality is that, as Anand Gopal wrote in his book, that really the Taliban's Hanafi rights Islam, as strict as they enforce that stuff, that it's by far more progressive than the Pashtunwali tribal code. And this is a civilization that goes back to these ancient, 3,000-4,000 year old traditions where women are treated absolutely horribly, and where the Prophet Muhammad is a wokist compared to them. And so the Taliban come and say women are allowed to not only, inherit property, but they're allowed to buy and sell it. They're allowed to trade it, which is essentially step 1 of human rights, being able to own property. And the Taliban essentially overruled the ancient tribal code and say, come on, guys, get with it. Step into the 17th century now here. We're trying to, the 18th century, we're trying to catch up here. And, so it ain't perfect at all. But it's better than if you just had like anarchy. There's total statelessness. There was no Taliban regime even. And everything was just the tribal code.
You think that's good for
It'd be
women
worse.
and children?
Yeah, it'd be worse. And
It'd be
so
way
then,
worse.
and look, let's say that women's rights is really the issue. Fine. Normalize relations with the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, the Taliban regime, and then drop all sanctions, no punishments, bygones, and open up full trade relations and full civilian to civilian relations. And let's see if we can, get them to agree with us about some things. How about like, hey, we could come up with all kinds of investment capital for you guys to build up your country. But, you really could lighten up on some of your rules about women leaving the house or whatever, something without, because look, B1s and B52s and Army Delta Force have not done it. Right. So like, hey, maybe we should try persuasion.
Right. I mean, war zones are the absolute worst place for women and children.
Right. And by the way, I'm sorry, I got to say this because I'll forget it because I got what Biden's got. The great journalist Ann Jones told me, and I think she wrote this for TomDispatch.com, that the number one priority for the Afghan military and police forces that the Americans have created, not the Taliban government, the American government their number one priority is chasing down runaway women and girls. Jesus Christ. That's who they are. They're slave catchers anyway. They oppress women as bad as you could imagine anyway. And why does a little girl run away from home? And what does it mean that the cop's the one bringing her back?
Right.
And so George Bush can pat himself on the back all goddamn day, but he's a liar, even if he's lying to himself too. But it's just not true that he's helped these people. He hasn't helped them.
And women like me, it should be obvious that when we, scoff at that, we're not saying that we don't think they should have rights. We're saying that's bullshit. And this is just a pretense. You're just putting some noble goal out that you don't believe in at all.
Right. Of course not.
So, and I'm just sick of being exploited in that. It's just another exploitation is what it is.
Yeah.
It's just another form of it.
This is my thing too. All of the killing and everything bothers me and really more. But the thing that kind of really sticks in my craw all the time is all of the lying and the dishonesty. Because what's really going on there, right, is they're trying to conscript you into their cause. They're trying to get you to be an accessory to their crimes by gaining your assent, by manipulating you, right? Like, even as much as America pays for the conflict, the domination of the Palestinians by the Israelis, and as objectionable as all of that is, the thing that really pisses me off is all of the dishonesty and all the, I think this is the IDF, the Israeli military, it's their own phrase, crying and shooting, meaning they're the world's greatest hypocrites as they murder people and seize their land. They go around crying, "Wah, poor me. Why are you such an anti-Semite? You bully me all day and you won't leave me alone," while they're killing people and stealing their land. And then, and especially to the American audience, oh, what if we weren't out here at Fort Apache holding back all the, Muslim orc hordes from the east coming to, overwhelm you? When that's all a bunch of crap. And the only reason those people are mad at us is because we back the Israelis. And the only reason that they're mad at the Israelis is because the Israelis kill them and steal their property. And instead, they got to feed us a line of crap at volume 11 all day long, every day, and point their finger and falsely accuse anyone who knows better of being a vicious, bigoted anti-Semite for daring to call them out on their sins. And I just, you know what? That I can't abide. You know what I mean? There's always going to be oppression in the world. And frankly, the American government is always going to back it and be responsible for it. But I just can't stand being lied to. And I just can't stand people working that hard to get my assent for their crime and for their sick persecution of innocent people. And the way the Israelis treat the Palestinians is absolutely as despicable as any war criminals on the planet. And they try to bullshit me into climbing on board for it and cheering for it. Nah.
Yeah, I always thought it is the dishonesty. Like, I'm always saying to my friends, the hypocrisy is what really burns. I mean, it really bothers me. It burns. And I always say, like, we need some better words. There aren't enough words for hypocrisy. We need one like supersized hypocrisy for the type of thing that I see. But really, at the root of it, it's the dishonesty and the exploitative
and the cynicism,
nature of
right?
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a mix of things. But I think at the root of it, it is that dishonesty that you're talking about. And with the women, I'll just say one more thing about that is that the women who are climbing the ladder now in the war machine, as if this is, liberating for us, or this is progress for us. But the truth of the matter is, there's no way you can get they're just putting a female face on the same faces of war who've been behind it all along. They're just pushing women out front so that it's more palatable. And so they, the whole wokeism thing, which is a bunch of bullshit too.
Yeah.
The at least the motives behind it, or it's I don't even know. It gets me so upset. I don't even know if I can put it into words. But the truth of the matter is that someone like me could never progress in that world. So it's not really a fair game. You can only, if you are super hawk, who carries the water for long enough. That's the only way you'd ever have a chance of even advancing in that world.
Well, it's just, it's a cover. It's a sop to the left from the liberals, right? And at the same time, so it's saying, look, we're not that center left. Look how progressive we are. We're getting better and better all the time on these kinds of things that matter to you in a way. But at the same time, this is the way that they prove what leftists they're not. That like, hey, we're not really leftists. We're liberals. And the way that you can tell that we're not too far left is that we're proud American warmongers. And whatever American foreign policy is, we stand with our president. We stand with our leadership. And, so it's not just for the arms dealers themselves, but for the whole kind of Democratic Party and that whole, corporate liberal world that this is how you can trust them still, is that they're really bad on war. Otherwise you might think that they're too far left. So this is like, to them, it's their saving grace. Like, see, I support your muscular foreign policy. You won't find me burning no flag. I'm down with whatever war you guys got.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really, really
and then
to me.
So how's the left take that?
What
the discourse is so screwed up because the right wingers don't know what a left winger is, right? So whenever you hear the conservatives, they conflate all this together, right? Where Nancy Pelosi and Hillary Clinton, according to Sean Hannity, are the far left. But if you ask a far leftist, they hate the liberals, who they consider to be some kind of right winger, which is sort of right, I guess.
It is.
But but so, I mean, you got to admit, with the exception of all of our favorite writers, the mass movement of leftists
they're hawks now.
They just ignore. They don't care about foreign policy at all now. I think
they just pretended it's not happening. The classic demonstration of that was the transition between Bush and Obama, and how, screaming all the time, and I was right there with them, anti-war, taking an loud anti-war stance until Obama came into office.
Yep.
And then it all calmed down, and the anti-war movement just sort of, faded into the background. They still make some very weak gestures to but basically,
I mean, in fairness, the worst years of the Iraq war were over in 2008. Like, that was the very last of the worst of the fighting was in 2008. And so it was pretty much downhill from there as far as the war and out by the end of 11. And then after that, and they did this very deliberately, right? We're putting the robots up and we're going to bomb Pakistan and Yemen and Somalia, mostly with drones. And then the war in Libya, well, we're leading from behind, but we're going to pretend that it's really the Italians, the French, and the British are the ones doing it, and not really us. And in Syria, well, that's the Turks and the Qataris and the Saudis and the Jordanians and the Israelis with a little bit of help from the CIA and Al-Qaeda fighting that war, right? But it was not sending in the 3rd Infantry. And so as an illusion for the average Joe, it's pretty effective to make it feel like this is peacetime. The wartime was back during W. Bush, and we haven't been it hadn't been wartime since then. And, Scahill one time was on the Bill Maher show during Obama years. And Scahill is saying, look, man, these drone killings are wrong. They're bombing weddings. They're bombing funerals. They're killing innocent people. It's goddamn crazy out there, man. And Bill Maher goes, yeah, but George Bush marched the whole damn 3rd Infantry Division into Iraq. And Scahill's like, well, yeah, I mean, that was really bad. And that was bigger and worse. But this is also still really bad. And Maher is like, nah, I'm just not seeing it, right? Like we're not even attacking the government of Yemen. And this is before we were attacking the government of Yemen in 15. This is the drone war against AQAP. Like, we're just killing some bad guys in the country with the permission of the government. So screw it. I don't care. Compared to what Bush Jr. did, this is nothing. That's the point of view of a center-left Democrat, and so like they'll grade it on that sliding scale. And
they're willing to just go along with the whole covert war.
Look, and the reason people mistakenly think I'm smart is just because I memorized some foreign names, right? And Bill Maher's not willing to do that, right? Like I don't speak a word of Arabic, but I still remember which one is Muqtada al-Sadr and which one is Ali al-Sistani. But you got to do a little bit of work to figure out which Shiite religious cleric is which and why you care at all. You know what I mean? And so, like, I remember after the first World Trade Center bombing, that was a big deal. And I was still just a high school kid. But 93, even though they only killed 6 people, they almost toppled one tower over into the other. And I learned that pretty soon afterwards, that the engineers thought if they'd only parked the truck bomb 15 feet that a ways, it would have been the ultimate nightmare. You could have 20, 30,000 people killed in an instant. Have one tower break at the bottom, at the parking garage level, and break over, tilt over and hit the other tower, and they both fall down, fall over and hit other buildings from there and all that kind of thing. Just absolute mayhem. But then there's 2 things about it. The first thing was the Waco raid happened the next day. And David Koresh is a lot easier to pronounce than Abdul Basit and, Ramzi bin al, whatever the hell. Oh, bin al Sheep was later, but you know what I mean? The blind Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman and all of these guys. And so, hard name to pronounce, hard name to memorize, hard narrative to follow. And, but with the Davidians thing, and then that became, for people who are too young to remember, that became a 51-day siege, a 6-week siege by the FBI. So it was on TV all day, every day. And this is the very first few, this is Bill Clinton's first 100 days, basically. And at the beginning of Bill Clinton's presidency in 1993. And so the World Trade Center just didn't really come up. Like occasionally there'd be a news special about it. Bill Curtis on Investigative Reports did a thing about it. The New York Times covered it, but it never really became a topic in the media of real import. It was, people were just, they were turned off by how complicated it sounded to try to figure it out. A bunch of Middle Eastern guys. And so it was basically, the hope was this will be a one-off and we won't have to think about stuff like this anymore, and just kind of ignore it and it'll go away, which is not a good policy. And, but so I remember that, right? I remember also thinking that, like, man, that would probably be a real pain to try to read enough articles about this, that I actually learned the names of all the different players and what role they played and why. And in fact, when I did get interested in it, what was the hook? The hook was the FBI could have stopped it. They had an informant in the ring, and then they dropped the ball and they let the plot carry out anyway. And in fact, their informant was going to be the fake bomb maker. And instead, he had to drop out because they screwed up the case. And they brought in the real bomb maker, Abdul Basit. Ramzi Youssef was the guy that built the bomb and killed the 6 people and almost killed 30,000 or whatever it was. So, and then that was all on the FBI. So that was the interest to me, was how, and especially I was more of a kook back then when I was a kid. And I thought, well, that was all on purpose, that they wanted that to happen so they could have their war on terrorism then, which is probably not right, really right. I think it was just because Carson Dunbar is really bad at doing his job.
I didn't realize that it didn't get that much attention elsewhere. So I'm in New Jersey and I work for a company that we provided like stockbroker terminals, to the Wall Street firm. So it was a shockwave through the building I was in that day, and it was a real panic. But they were our client, they were our like biggest clients. So, but anyway, I want to ask you one more thing about Afghanistan before we roll out of this. So we get the we get George Bush on Deutsche Welle, and we get the MI6 guy saying, I don't know, this could be a real disaster. And one thing he did say was that basically that the goal to do nation building in Afghanistan was wrong, and to try to turn it into a democracy and all that was wrong. Maybe if they had taken a different strategy, which I guess, second guessing themselves is probably normal. Anyway, the main thing that came across in the headlines was that, oh my God, this could be a dangerous disaster, and it could be, exactly what you would expect. It's going to lead to more terrorist attacks at home and all that stuff. But overall, we know that most of the population wanted out of this war.
Right.
So I haven't had anybody say to me like, oh my God, we got to get back into Afghanistan. I haven't heard one person express that.
Only Hawks.
View.
Yeah, only DC,
But
people with a conflict of interest, not the American people.
So how do the, as far as you can see, how do the factions, like who is it that seems to want to put a halt to this? Because the withdrawal is not completely done. I mean, it seems like it's pretty
close.
done.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, they sped it up. I was surprised at how fast. First of all, I was shocked that they actually left Bagram. I never thought they'd leave Bagram.
I know.
Second, I thought they would drag it out. And then I read, this might be mostly done by like the beginning or the middle of July. And it appears that it mostly is.
Yeah.
Are there people
I got a big caveat
saying
there.
Like they think they could still put a stop to this? And how do the factions sort out, as far as you know? Same people?
Well, I mean, all the worst hawks at all the worst magazines and think tanks and whatever are all still against it. And they're all saying the same thing as Bush, that you can't go now. But none of them have a coherent story about, how we're supposed to stay. So if you look at especially like Max Boot and Michael O'Hanlon and some of these hawks, they go, well, look, we haven't lost any soldiers in the past couple of years. And so the cost of staying is almost nothing. And as Biden said correctly, called them out in his speech about this last week and said, yeah, but that's because we had a ceasefire while we were negotiating in good faith with the Taliban.
Right.
To say that this is costless is not right. If we break the deal, then that means the Taliban goes back to war against us. And we've already learned we cannot defeat them without the kind of massive, indiscriminate use of firepower that we're just not willing to do. Like the Russians, then the Russians lost anyway. But the Russians killed something like 1 million Afghans. The Russians just carpet bombed their towns off the face of the earth. And they still didn't pacify the Pashtun tribes. Yeah. Right? And so that's the deal. That's what Biden said, was there is not a military solution to this, which is, you got to be man enough to say that our Army and Marine Corps is not strong enough or talented enough or capable of gaining intelligence refined enough to find and fix and fight and kill their enemies and leave everybody else alone. And especially in a way where everybody else decides that they really like us and like having us around, since we never miss and never, hurt innocent people and whatever. It's just crazy. It's just never going to work, never could work. Obama knew it wasn't going to work when he authorized the Petraeus McChrystal surge in 2009. And he did it anyway. And they all knew that the whole thing was crazy. And you know what's funny was I had the first substantive, I can't remember what the others were. There are a couple of kind of idiot criticisms, but the first real substantive Amazon comment on my Afghanistan book saying that this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. I was over there and this is the deal and this is how wrong he is. And this is how, you know, easily we could win it now and all of this. And he wrote, you know, it wasn't convincing, but it was rational, an argument against my book. And this was like a year and a half after it came out. And that day was the day that the Washington Post published the Afghanistan papers, where the leaders of the Afghan war admitted that they knew all along they could not win and they wouldn't admit it and couldn't admit it. And including Douglas Lute, who was the general who was appointed the war czar by W. Bush and who Obama kept and who was in charge of running the Afghan war for both presidents, told when he thought his statement would be kept secret forever and off the record forever, told the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, we didn't have the foggiest notion of what we were doing over there. We didn't know who's who. We didn't know why. We didn't know who we're killing or what's going to happen as a result of it. On down the chain, what he did not know, what he could not possibly. And then it's all of them. That's all of them. And you read the Afghanistan papers, it's interviews with like 150 or 200 different people from the Defense Department and State Department who were in charge of implementing this war. And they all say the same thing, that, yeah, we knew this was never going to work. We're just over there make work. The Obama team, they call it Afghan good enough. That means when you can pretend that you accomplished something and then move on to the next district. Afghan good enough. We dug a ditch. We're going to pretend that it's, you know, any good for anything and then move on to the next thing. Is, you know, I don't know if they say this in New Jersey. It's not necessarily just a libertarian phrase. It's a Texas phrase, at least. Good enough for government work. Only here, it's good enough for government work on the far side of the planet where nobody's checking and you can charge as much as you want. Oh yeah. Give us $50 million. We'll build a girls' school. And then they stack a few cinder blocks on each other out in the desert somewhere. No water, no electricity, no road, no access. You know, it's not even near where any little girls live. And the whole thing is just, look, I stacked some cinder blocks in the desert. And the whole war's like that. You know, the whole damn war is like that. And I just thought that was great that, like, I didn't even need to answer back that comment. I don't guess you can do that on Amazon comments anymore. But the guy wrote this thing about this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. The Afghan war is just great. And you're stupid and whatever. And on that very day was the day that they released the Afghan papers that could have been called, okay, Scott Horton called this 100% right a year and a half ago, because here's all of them admitting exactly what my accusations were then, you know. And seriously, if you read the Hawks now, and you can find some in the Washington Post and wherever, saying we can't leave now because of George Bush reasons, everything will get worse if we go, which I don't argue against. I think everything will be very ugly when we go. It is already. But if you read them, none of them have a coherent argument.
No.
None of them even say, okay, look, I'm pretty sure that we can at least help our people hang on to Kabul for 20,000 troops. And I think that we could, if we just spent, $10 billion and 20,000 troops for 2.5 years, at least we'll be able to hang on to Kabul and Mazar-e Sharif. Right? Like, what do you give me for $20 billion? $20 billion, I could maybe get you a Herat. You want to try to hang on to Herat? Right? Like, nobody is even making an argument. They're not even making an argument. They're just saying that, well, look, we can't leave now. But who says that if we stay, or how many men would it take to leave there to keep the government in Kabul in power? And for how long? And how long are we supposed to continue to do this and lose in what, slightly slower motion than we're losing right now? And
Well,
then meanwhile, speaking of that, the Taliban are just walking right into military bases
right.
and saying, this is ours now. And there's all footage of this all over Twitter. You can see it where they're saying, give us your rifles and go home. And in some cases, they're taking the commanders out back and shooting them. But they're telling all the soldiers, go home. They're not even taking them prisoner. They're sending them home. And they're just taking over. They're just walking across the whole country.
And hugging them and, and handing over. And then, there's a whole convoy of Humvees and pickup trucks and whole rooms full of rifles.
All the armories.
There's footage all over the place, and they're hugging them.
Yep. And now look, there will be places.
Those guys.
I think there will be places where the Hazaras and the Tajiks and the Uzbeks prefer to fight, but I don't know if they can. I mean, honestly, in fact, take into account what you just said. Just think about how many more weapons the Taliban have gotten their hands on just in the last few weeks. And they've been buying, the Americans had to pay the Taliban taxes to protect us while we're driving our convoys across their country all these years. And they paid literally billions, not hundreds of millions, literally billions of dollars. The Americans paid in taxes to the Taliban in order to operate in this country. Then they take that money and buy weapons from the Afghan military, including night vision and trucks and rifles and everything else. And then now they're just walking into military bases like ISIS in 2014 and just taking whatever they want. So there's footage. You can find it on my Twitter feed from a few days ago. It's really crazy footage, man. You get a kick out of watching it. It's a Taliban commander sitting under a tree with a bunch of Hazaras. They're the Shiites. And he's telling them, he's telling them, welcome to the New World Order, you sons of bitches. This is the deal now. But he's trying to be nice, at least while the camera's on him. And for argument's sake, but this is very much like Tony Soprano joining as a new partner in your business. And you might as well just smile and be glad he's here because you ain't got a prayer anyway, And so it's funny, man. At the beginning, he says, listen, you guys know we've always been nice to you and treated you fairly. And they all groan and are just like, oh, shit. That's not the way I remember it, man. Oh, God, But they, what are they going to do? So they just sit there. And then he just lectures them for like half an hour. And he's just saying, look, I understand some of you guys want to grab rifles and form militias to try to resist our power. But let me tell you something. You guys just got beat when you had the U.S. Army and Marine Corps and Air Force at your beck and call and all their power and all their equipment and all their money, and you weren't able to defeat us then. Now you think your little ragtag militia without American help is going to be able to stave us off? Let me tell you something. You ought to just go ahead and give up now. Don't make me kill you, because I'll kill you. The war's over. We won it. And he just sits there telling them that for about half an hour. And he's quite redundant, in fact, in the speech. And then at the end of it, he says, now, do any of you, any elders have a comment? You want to talk about this or anything? And the one old man goes, oh, yeah, we always liked you Taliban guys, man. You were always really fair to us. And remember that time that you guys were hungry and we made you something to eat? Remember that? Yeah, no, we're all right. Yeah. And they're just licked. So now, I don't know if that goes really for the whole country or what. Right. I'm sure there will be places where the local, some forces will have enough power to try to resist them for a while. But, here's the one I'm really keeping my eye on is Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who used to be the CIA's guy back in the 80s and then was the leader of Hizb-e-Islami, who, was allied with the Taliban and the Haqqani network against the U.S. in this whole war there. Well, he made his peace with the Kabul government back in 2016.
So he's in Kabul, right?
So he's in Kabul. He's got his whole militia with him. And in Fool's Errand, I have a little chapter called A Trojan Horse, where it really looks to me like, maybe he did just make peace and maybe he just got old and was sick of fighting and decided to just come home.
Paid well, yeah.
But on the other hand, I think he could clap his hands and he'd have 20 or 30,000 armed men inside Kabul, already inside the capital city. If they wanted to seize the parliament, what's there to stop them? If they wanted to take over whatever they want to take over, if they want to open the gates wide open for the Taliban to come in, I think the Taliban could probably just walk right into Kabul. rather than have to invade it with, a full armed force. I think they could probably just pick all the entrances to the city and everybody meet in the center of town at noon on Thursday and come from all directions and just walk right into town and own the damn thing. I don't know if anybody there is prepared to try to stop them, honestly.
650 troops we're going to have in Kabul. Is that
at the
the deal?
embassy.
But that doesn't count the private. That doesn't count the contractors, right?
That's true. But that is a force strong enough to protect the embassy, they hope. It is not a force strong enough to protect the Kabul government. It is, Ashraf Ghani came to DC 2 weeks ago and said, Biden, are you really going to screw me? And Biden said, yes, goodbye. I'm not propping up your government. You're going to have to. Good luck. And he left empty-handed. So, I don't know. I got to say this. My gut says this ain't right. Everything I know about what's going on says that this is not right. But I have a source inside the U.S. Army who tells me that they're preparing to go back to Bagram, that they're going to drop paratroopers on it and take back over that base. For what exact purpose, I don't know, or for what length of time, I don't know. It's just a single source. I'm convinced the guy means well and is not jerking me around. I don't know whether he's correct or not. And it is just a single source. But, if it was just to, one big move to evacuate all the translators and all the sock puppets and whatever, and pack them all on C-130s and fly them out of there, maybe that's okay. But if they're really breaking the deal with the Taliban, I just can't believe that. I just can't believe that. But if Biden was going to outright break the deal with the Taliban, he would have broke the deal with the Taliban back in February when he announced that he was kicking the can down the road a couple months. He didn't really break the deal then. And in fact, I interpreted that for the worse then. That, hey, if he's moving the date from May to September,
right,
he's breaking the deal.
It reneged. So
and his people made it clear to the Taliban that, look, don't start attacking us. We're leaving. We're just, they didn't want to do it on Trump's timetable, but we'll do it a few months later.
They did start moving quickly after that, too.
They did start moving quickly after that. And look, and all the leaks to the Times, remember, as you said, the American people are against the war, but there's no constituency of powerful people who are against the war. So all of the pressure on Biden inside the imperial center is to stay, to not leave. And he's had to, essentially, stick by his guns and say, we're not going to extend this thing. We're giving up now. Where I think he really was kind of overruling the chiefs and overruling the Pentagon. I think they made their position clear, and I think he told them, thank you, gentlemen. The answer is no. I'm pretty sure that's what happened there. I hate to give the man too much credit, but frankly, I don't think he believed in the war against the Taliban ever since, the middle of the Bush years. Certainly by the time he became vice president, he did not believe in the counterinsurgency war against the Taliban at all. He only wanted to fight foreign terrorists inside Afghanistan, not the Taliban. In other words, he didn't give a damn if the Taliban came back to power as early as 2009, maybe earlier than that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I believe him now saying he was, always against it or not, but whatever.
Well, certainly, I mean, the history of 2009 is he tried to tell Obama not to do the coin surge. He wanted to do a surge, but only of 20,000 men, and only in the name of killing foreign terrorists and not pacifying the Pashtun population and defeating the Taliban. And in fact, his position really was advice to Obama that you don't have to do this, kiddo, and Obama did it anyway.
Yeah.
Because, that was a big part of it. His relationship with Obama was, he's like, I forget, 30 years older than Obama, right? Or 20.
20, probably about 20. Well, Obama's like 60 now. So not quite 20.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
I think he's 78. Biden is 78. I think Obama's about 59 or 60.
Okay. So yeah, almost 20 years then. But so that's enough where he really felt like his job was to sort of protect Obama. That, Obama was still a first-term senator when he became president. Biden been around since the days of
no
Richard
foreign
Nixon.
policy, but Biden was his foreign policy cred.
So so Biden really saw his job as kind of protecting Obama and telling Obama, listen, the generals talk real tough, but you're the boss, not them, and you can tell them no. And then Obama didn't tell them no. He was afraid to tell them no. It wasn't enough.
Biden didn't have any history of telling generals no about anything, though.
No, he didn't.
So,
That's true.
uh, but yeah, I can believe that he, wanted to do a different kind of surge, a smaller surge or whatever. But
Yeah. I
um,
mean, he wasn't saying get out, but he was saying forget the Taliban. Who cares about them? And we can
yeah,
separate them out from our actual enemies here. Which,
yeah, the
by the
whole
way, there are no
coin
real
thing.
Al Qaeda guys left in the country to fight anyway.
Yeah, after like what, 6 months or
Yeah,
something? Yeah. So I gotta let you go soon. Do you have another 10 minutes to do a bonus
sure,
question, or you got
sure. Let's do
another
it.
thing coming up? So I got two articles. Yesterday in the news was this bus accident or explosion or whatever in Pakistan where uh, like 9 Chinese nationals, some of them engineers, and they're working on the economic corridor, the deal between China and Pakistan where they're building up
Mm-hmm.
the infrastructure, part of the Belt and Road, all that. And they made a big deal about this, accident. The Pakistani says it's an accident. Chinese said no, it was a deliberate attack, and there were explosives. So, I see that, and then I see the New York Times making a little bit of hay out of that, saying, um, "Oh, the Chinese are a little worried about us withdrawing from Afghanistan." China,
Mm-hmm.
the headline being China criticized the Afghan war. Now it worries about withdrawal. An explosion that killed the Chinese workers in Pakistan stirred fears in Beijing of regional instability.
Mm-hmm.
And um, and then I see this other thing, um, this op-ed kind of thing in the Hill, where they're saying that the withdrawal from Afghanistan would undermine, let me see, would undermine Russia's efforts to dominate Eurasia. And his argument is that, I mean, it's a little crazy, so I'm going to have to read you part of it. He says, the upside takes the form of a decisive end to the flow of American blood, like the good things about withdrawing from Afghanistan. The flow of American blood in and treasure to Afghanistan. As importantly, however, the upside to U.S. withdrawal from that country also takes the form of destabilizing Russia's southern flank and thus weakening Moscow's ability to pursue its great power ambitions in both Central Asia and Europe. Most immediately, this upside takes the form of a decisive end to the flow. Oh, sorry, I'm reading the same thing again. So you can see where he's going here. He's saying that it's going to destabilize the stand countries. New York Times is saying, oh, China's having second thoughts, and maybe they're even putting pressure on Washington uh, to not withdraw so quickly. And then this guy, he's making a different kind of argument, but he's saying, oh, this is going to destabilize the stand countries, and maybe it'll even draw Russia back in.
Mm-hmm.
My whole question centers around this idea of the whole region to destabilizing, turning into complete chaos. The answer to the bonus question is in the extra bonus segment for patrons. You can get access to all bonus content by subscribing at Rockfin or Patreon, plus other perks like patron live streams, Zoom calls, and access to our Discord channel where we can talk among ourselves. So that's my pitch, and I hope that some of you will join us. And now I'll continue with the interview wrap-up. Scott, tell everybody how they can follow all your work, where to find your book, your new book, well, both your books, and anything else that you want to promote while you're here.
Well, I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute. That's libertarianinstitute.org. Got lots of great writers and podcast hosts for you there and all that stuff. And then I'm the editorial director of antiwar.com. And that's really the most important project on the internet there. And really, we're doing so good right now. We got so many great writers at antiwar.com. We're just absolutely killing it right now. The whole project there. And that's Eric and Jason and Dave. And, all of our writers get all the credit for that, putting that whole thing together every day. And then I do a show, the Scott Horton Show. I got something very close to 5,555 interviews for it. It might be 57 now or something. I was just looking the other day. It's something like 5,555 interviews for you going back to 2003 at scotthorton.org and also at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. And then the books are, you can see them over my shoulders there. I got Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and The Great Ron Paul. That's transcripts of my interviews to Ron Paul over the years. And then the new book is Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. That came out in January. And it's all the wars, all the Middle East wars from Jimmy Carter through Donald Trump. And Joe Biden's role in it all is highlighted throughout as well, by the way. And so it's all there for you. The Iranian Revolution, Afghanistan in the 80s, the Iran-Iraq War, Iraq War 1, Iraq War 1.5, the rise of Al-Qaeda, then Afghanistan, Iraq War 2, Somalia, Pakistan, Libya, Syria, Iraq War 3, and then Mali and Niger and Nigeria and Burkina Faso and all of that crap. So it's all in there. Oh, and Yemen. Did I say Yemen?
Yeah, it's a lot of wars.
300 pages. It's all in there.
And Kyle, too, at antiwar.com, right?
Yeah, Kyle's my guy at the Institute and at antiwar.com both.
Yeah,
and he's great. The great Kyle Anzalone, hosts a show there, Conflicts of Interest, and he's the opinion editor at antiwar.com as well.
I just got Danny's book, but after I get that, I got to read yours and bring you back to talk about that. There's a number.
Well, email me your address. I'll send you one.
Okay. Oh, okay. I will. Yeah. Thanks.
Cool. I'll be happy to.
All right. Thanks so much, Scott. Great talking with you.
You too. Thank you, Joanne. Talk soon.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening. Special thanks to Scott Horton. Follow him on Twitter at Scott Horton Show. Find his work at libertarianinstitute.org, antiwar.com, scotthorton.org. This podcast is independent media. Listener support really important. rockfin.com/aroundtheempire, patreon.com/aroundtheempire, paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. Find it on any mobile podcast app, the website aroundtheempire.com, on Rockfin, Patreon, or on YouTube, soon to be on Odyssey, possibly some more. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe. Follow on Twitter at Around the Empire. Take good care, everybody. We'll see you next time.